Well, having talked about the contribution of different theorists and varied approach of postcolonialism, now we shall go ahead with the last part of this particular essay, that is methodology. So any school of criticism, has its own methodology. Like many schools of criticism, postcolonialism uses a variety of approaches. Just now we understood to textual analysis. So it adopts deconstructionist method, feminism, Marxism, reader-oriented criticism, African American criticism, and cultural studies employ post-colonial theories in their critical methodologies. So you should understand this. All these approaches, employ this methodology, post-colonial methodology, in their critical theories, in their study. They employ post-colonial theories. So these critics identify two major approaches or strengths of post-colonial criticism. One is post-colonial criticism, and the other one is theory, post-colonial theory. Now, what is the difference between these two? Those who engage in post-colonial criticism investigate ways in which texts bear the traces of colonialism's ideology and interpret such text as challenging or promoting the colonizer's purposes and hegemony. You need to understand, what does a post-colonial criticism do? So the critics who are engaged in post-colonial criticism investigate, study, research ways in which text bear the traces, text carry, the text show the traces of colonialism's ideology. How the ideology, colonial ideology is, there in this particular text. And they try to interpret such text as challenging, sometimes, or promoting the colonizer's purpose and hegemony. These kind of text, they promote the colonizer's purpose and their dominance, their hegemony. Okay, so more frequently than not, those who engage in this type, in post-colonial criticism, analyze canonical text. For example, text by William Shakespeare. We refer to the analysis of Tempest. Okay, these canonical texts from colonizing countries are analyzed. And the another approach is post-colonial theory. The post-colonial theory moves beyond the bounds of traditional literary studies. So this is difference. It goes beyond traditional literary studies, and it investigates social, political, and economic concerns of the colonized and the colonizers. Both social, political, and economic aspects are taken into consideration in analyzing the text, history, culture, etc. Now, these are two methodologies, these are two approaches, but whatever methodology, no matter, a post-colonial critic may choose. Now, what a post-colonial choose matters greatly whether or not the theorist or critic has been a colonial subject. Okay? Whatever methodology is adopted, no matter which methodology the post-colonial critic may choose. What matters then? Whether or not the theorist or critic has been a colonial subject. For example, Homi K. Bhabha was the post-colonial subject. Edward Said was a post-colonial subject. But when we talk about the people from the Western countries, if they write, when we talk about Joseph Conrad, for example, as a writer, his Heart of Darkness, is written from the Western perspective. Or E.M. Foster's Passage to India, E.M. Foster was from the colonized countries, colonizing countries, Western countries. So his perception may different. So whether the person belongs to this or that matters a lot. So those who have been the subject of colonization are themselves a somewhat different set of questions than those post-colonialists who have not. I told you. Suppose a person from Britain is post-colonialist. The person's perception may be different, may change. So the person living and writing in a colonized culture possesses three significant questions, raises, poses three questions. First is, who am I? How did I develop into the person I am? To what country or countries or what cultures am I forever linked? So these three questions are being posed by the person, post-colonial critique, living from the colonized context. Okay. So in asking and answering the first person, the question, who am I? First person. The colonized author is connecting himself or herself to historical roots. He's trying to find his historical root. By asking and answering the second question, how did I develop into the person I am? The writer is admitting a tension between these historical roots and the new culture or hegemony, unhomeliness, imposed on the writer by the conquerors. How did I develop into the person I am? For example, today's Indians, the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we eat, that is shaped by our conquerors. And by asking and answering the third question, the writer confronts to what country or countries, to what cultures am I forever linked? So the writer confronts, confronts means faces the fact that he or she is both an individual and a social construct created and shaped primarily by the dominant culture. Am I an Indian or a British? That question. Because you have that particular thinking. You know, as an individual or social construct, we are created and shaped primarily by the dominant culture. I told you, post colonialism continues. Even we think that independence, we have got independence, still the lifestyle that we have adopted, our way of thinking is highly influenced by the dominant culture. Now it continues in different forms. The TV serials that we see, the movies that we see, okay, the books that we read, all these contribute in shaping our personality. For example, the wedding system that we see in TV serials, and that is followed in real life. Nowadays, I see, people, the groom and bride are dancing, etc. There is many videos. I was surprised. So isn't it the influence of certain dominant culture? I'm not talking about Western culture, but at least the culture which is not diverse. We try to become homogeneous. So the written works penned by these authors who are, from the colonized cultures, will necessarily be personal and always political and ideological. Whatever written works they produce are personal, but they are political and ideological. And the creation of a text and its reading may be painful and disturbing, but it is also enlightening. Enlightening means it enhances your knowledge. It gives you some new knowledge. So whatever the result, the text will certainly be a message sent back to the empire. The empire writes back, we say. Empire, British Empire, for example, telling the imperialist the effects of their colonization. We are telling them these are the effects of your colonization, and how their Western hegemony has damaged and suppressed the ideologies of those who were conquered. We had our own culture, we had our own ideologies, and these ideologies have been suppressed because of the Western hegemony. We started thinking, we started living. If you remember Lord Macaulay, the British educationist and British administrator, had declared in 1835, with that English education was introduced to Indians. So what he had said, we are going to have a class of people who will be Indian by their skin and color, but English by their manners and etiquettes. Okay, by their flesh and by their color, sorry, blood, they'll be Indians, but by their manners, etiquettes, they'll be English. So that was the vision of Lord Macaulay. So that is what we see today. We have lost our original culture. So because of the Western hegemony, and post-colonialist critics are quick to point out that they do indeed make value judgments about cultures, people, and text. Further, they ask us, their readers and critics, to examine carefully the standards against which we are making our value judgments. They are asking us. For example, Edward Said cautions us, makes us aware of. I quote, "It is not necessary to regard every reading or interpretation of a text as the moral equivalent of war. It's not necessary. But whatever else they are, works of literature are not merely text." Okay? Means every reading or interpretation of a text is the moral equivalent of war. That is a war itself. Morally, it is equivalent to war. Okay, they are not merely text. Every work of literature is not merely text. It is a kind of, war. So, Said or other post-colonists like him attempt to read a text in a fullest context, and they are careful not to frame their analysis solely in academic discourse. They take into consideration the political aspects as well, the ideological aspects as well. So there is a diverse and psychologically full, laden and complex theory. Post-colonial theory is a diverse but psychologically laden complex theory which highlights the writing back, the empire writes back by Bill Ashcroft I mentioned yesterday, of those who have experienced colonial operation to the colonizers and to the world. So there is a close reading of a text. Particularly, they focus on the text language. And this analysis questions they assume the taken for granted positions by the Western mindset. Now, for example, how truth is constructed, what is truth exactly, must be examined rather than exposing errors of the colonizers. A post-colonial critic should try to understand, examine how truth is constructed instead of talking about the faults, the errors. Okay, so there are a variety of prejudices taken for assumed things, disbeliefs, attitudes that can be found in all texts. So therefore, there is a variation in the approach. There is a diverse approach for each text. Okay. So these critics, post-colonial critics, guard against ascribing their own cultural ideas onto post-colonial works. They don't want to. They are against this. Now, what we call correlating their own cultures, finding their own cultures. because they realize that any attempt to understand completely a subaltern group, subaltern means a marginalized, a subordinate group. For example, Indians in the context of colonial rule. Again, within India as well, there are certain untouchable groups. They are subaltern. Workers, farmers, peasants, small farmers, not zamindars, landlords I'm talking about. So they are subaltern groups. Okay? So their repression has to be understood. Okay? So this is how we understand that all post-colonial criticism is united in its opposition instead of their diverse approaches. They are united in its opposition to colonial and neo-colonial hegemonies. Even Navavasatwad we call. Neo-colonial hegemonies are there. Hegemony means dominance. And these criticism, despite of their diverse approaches, oppose such kind of hegemonies, colonial and neo-colonial. And they are concerned with the best ways to create a just and true decolonized, the reverse process. Decolonization is removing colonized attitude, decolonized culture and literature. So this is how we understand post-colonialism. Okay.